Ben, tout le temps des nouveaux qui arrivent. Voilà. Bon. Hello, everyone. We are here to attend the public defense of the thesis of Tiago Nogueira Pimenta dos Reis. The thesis is entitled The Sustainability of Global Agricultural Trade, Understanding Stickiness in Brazil's Soy Supply Chain. Before Tiago's presentation begins, I will introduce the members of the jury. Professor Patrick Meffroy from the UC Louvain is the supervisor of the thesis. Professor Tobias Kuem-Merle from Conservation Biogeography, Germany, is co-supervisor of the thesis. Is not here today. Is in Armenia with students. Professor Sophie Van Wambeek from the UC Louvain is the secretary of the jury. Thanks to her. Professor Eric Lambin from the UC Louvain. Dr. Toby Gardner is here from Traze SEI from Sweden, and Professor Gert Sparovek from the GeoLab USP in Brazil. We will proceed as follows. First, Tiago will present the main objectives of his thesis and the results of his research for 40 minutes. Then each member of the jury will make general comments and ask questions about the thesis. Tiago, you can start your presentation. We are listening to you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Laurence. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. Give me just a second to start it here. I'll share my screen. Sorry, I think it's not presenting properly. Just a second. Oh no, yeah, there you go. So thank you very much, you all, for being here. This is a very important day for me. As you know, I've been working for almost 4 years on this thesis, and I really appreciate your presence, your attention here. So just before we start here, I'd like to make an opening statement to say that this thesis is about connections, about people, about relationships, about the way we engage and relate with each other for trading food. It is about the way people engage with places and landscapes. So I will probably repeat many times here the terms supply chain actors, relationship patterns, geographic sourcing patterns, stickiness, of course, persistence, supply network configurations, sourcing, supply. Nonetheless, don't be confused, please, because all these terms, in the end, they refer to the same thing, which is basically and essentially how we connect with each other, how we connect with land, how we use land for the purpose of producing and trading food. Okay, so the context of this thesis is based on this multiple crises the world is facing now. As most of you probably know, the IPCC assessment report released last month showed that it's unequivocal our influence on the atmosphere, on ocean and land for warming the planet, excuse me. And this warming of the planet is mostly driven by our actions, our activities here on this planet related to the production and consumption of energy, fiber, food, fuels, and of course, the way we use land. This is also related to this second global crisis I'd like to stress as a background here, which is global biodiversity loss, where it's very curious that now about 4% of the biomass on Earth is on wild mammals. So this is very impressive in the sense of showing how we are destroying the diversity of life on Earth to produce our foods, to produce our energy, and so on. The third crisis I'd like to stress here is global food insecurity, because despite all these advancements in food production, all the efficiency gains in agricultural production, still we have about 1/3 of the people on Earth not having access to adequate food. On the other hand, we also have about 6 million people facing obesity. So there is a clear dysfunction in this system. There is something wrong, because at the same time, many people are starving, many other people are suffering from the excess or malnutrition, excess of food. So from all these multiple crises we are facing, and which is the problematic addressed by this thesis, what do theories generally say about agricultural trade and production? So I'd like to pick and stress some theoretical framings that provide some explanations to these issues. So for example, the telecoupling framework will say that consumption patterns affect and determine production in distant places, both directly and indirectly. Global commodity value chains and production networks and all these academic works in these fields, they will say that power imbalances, information asymmetries, reputation, pursuit of stability of supply, technological differences, all these factors will shape how we produce, trade, and consume our food, therefore determining land use trajectories as well. The agricultural economics fields will also point out some factors that may determine the persistence of trade flows and shape this agricultural production and supply worldwide. The political economy will also point out some social aspects, so-called embeddedness, and how trust influence these trade patterns. Finally, the land system sciences and economic geography, where this thesis and this work is more directly related, these fields will explain how and why companies and farmers cluster together geographically, why frontiers are created and expanded, for example, amongst other things. Yet, what's the gap, or what are we missing from all this knowledge? First of all, we still don't analyze trade relationship patterns or the way actors in the supply chain engage with each other for trade purposes. As I said in the beginning, this thesis is about relationships, how we relate with each other, how we relate with land. And so the questions that come out from this stream of questions is, how do companies engage with locations to source their products, for example? Or what are their geographic sourcing patterns? Meaning, how do they source from different locations over time? And what's the pattern behind these actions? So how do farmers engage with traders to sell their products? Or what are the farmers' supplying patterns? To whom do they sell? From whom do they buy? How frequently a farmer supplies to a trader? Why certain companies prefer to source always from certain places while others shift every year? And then what are the implications of these patterns, these persistent or shifting patterns? And then, do market prices and infrastructural conditions explain everything? Is it only economic? I don't believe so, and I will explain to you along this presentation. So finally, what do these supply chain relationship patterns may mean for sustainability? These are the overarching questions. And all these questions lead to this primary question that I will respond in the end of this presentation, which is, how can we understand and interpret global commodity supply chains to change them into drivers of positive and social and environmental transformations? Because I believe that science has a role in eliciting information, eliciting knowledge, and also informing for transformation. So now, more questions to address the former questions, more questions, but then these are more specific questions that I will respond in this thesis, directly respond. So how can we analyze supply chain relationship patterns? What's the relevance of these patterns for sustainability governance? How sticky can these patterns be? What are the underpinning factors or predictors of these stickiness patterns? What are the interactions between these patterns and environmental governance? And what are the implications of these for local development? It seems a bit obsessive around the idea of relationship patterns, but you will understand later. It is a bit obsessive indeed, but you will understand later the reason for this obsession. So the general hypothesis that I bring here is basically this idea that by eliciting and understanding the supply chain and trade relationship patterns, we can find elements to improve private sustainability initiatives. For example, these public policies and private commitments that are implemented to change the land use and the rural development trajectories. So the very important key aspect that I want to bring here with this thesis is that we need to look at these relationship patterns and see how knowing them can inform these sustainability initiatives for more positive land use and rural development trajectories. So how this thesis is structured is basically, I have this introduction, then I moved into conceptualizing and designing this method to measure stickiness. Then I looked at these potential causes of stickiness. Then I moved into looking for the implications of stickiness for sustainability government. Finally, for the implications for land use and development. And then I draw these more general conclusions. So what's this concept and method of stickiness? First of all, conceptually, stickiness in commodity supply chains is this ability of supply network configurations to be maintained over time and across perturbations. After having defined stickiness as such, we were not satisfied, and therefore we tried to sophisticate this a bit further, this concept. And then we devised these three multiscalar and not mutually exclusive dimensions, namely persistence, resistance, and recovery. Persistence is basically this ability of supply networks to persist over time, regardless any consideration of shocks or perturbations. It's basically, as you can see here in this animated image here, you have one trade pattern, then you have the same trade pattern, and you have the same trade pattern over the 3 points of time. Resistance, in turn, is this ability of supply chain networks to resist to shocks. So as you can see here, you have one condition and one pattern, then you have the shock, and the supply trade network resists to this shock and continues to be the same way afterwards. And then the third dimension is recovery capacity or recovery ability. So as you can see here in the first point, you have one pattern, then you have a shock or a perturbation, which changes the entire supply chain network. And then you have a recovery to a different state. Could be to the same state, but in this case, it is more or less the same, a similar condition as prior to the shock. So how can we measure this stickiness? Which data? Sorry, just one emphasis here. Despite we conceptualize all these three dimensions here, actually we go in depth only into this first dimension in this thesis. These two other dimensions we left for further researchers, for other PhD students who are coming in the future. So everything I will talk to you about stickiness now is related to the persistence dimension of stickiness from now on. So how can we measure this stickiness? Basically, we need trade data. We need to look at this trade and customs data, and we need to see this relational information. For example, who is trading with whom? Who is trading to whom? So we may have, for example, input suppliers supplying products to farmers. We may have farmers trading with traders or local warehouses or with local brokers. Then we may have the transportation companies making the linkages, or we may have traders selling to food processors and food processors to retailers. We may have anything. We can analyze any part of the supply chain, but we depend on this trade relational data. Who is selling to who? In this case, we used the trace data set on Brazil soy supply chain, which is this data linking the production landscapes in Brazil, the soy production landscapes in Brazil, to traders and to consumer markets, internationally speaking. But yet, how do we look at this trace data in this case, in this specific case? So basically, we created temporal networks where we aggregate farmers in soy municipalities, and then we analyze these supplying relationships between these municipalities and traders, but also between these municipalities and importing countries. Also, then the sourcing relationships centered around the traders, sourcing from municipalities, and then supplying to countries, and all these ways round. So basically, we have 6 types of relationships analyzed in this thesis. So the method to measure this supply chain stickiness is basically we imported and adapted some metrics from temporal network analysis, basically the topological overlap and the temporal correlation coefficient. Here are the equations. So just to simplify, these equations, they simply looks at the metrics, and in these metrics, you have all the linkages indicating 0 or 1 to show whether there is a connection between one sending node and one receiving node. And if this connection is maintained over time, we have an index of 1. If this connection is disrupted over time, we have an index of 0. But then, if we are looking at a network of 2,000 nodes, including municipalities, traders, and countries, of course, we have a huge variation in these numbers between 0 and 1. So we may find, for example, 0.2 for a municipality, which is very volatile in its supplying relationships, or we may find, for example, 0.97 for another municipality, which is very persistent in its supplying relationship patterns. So now, more specifically on methods, like all the methods employed in this thesis. So first, the case study. We defined Brazil's soy supply chain as a case study because it is a crucial country for addressing all those multiple crises that I raised in the beginning of this presentation. As you know, over 1985 and 2019, Brazil lost about 81 million hectares of natural formations to farming, meaning all types of agriculture, including soy. So in the crop season of 2017 and 2018, Brazil produced 35% of the world's soy and also exported a total value of 21.5 billion US dollars on an area 12 times the size of Belgium. So as you can see, Brazil is very critical. It's a very critical country for addressing climate change, because climate change is related to forest and native vegetation, and Brazil still has a lot of this in the country. Also for biodiversity laws, because Brazil is still the habitat for many endemic species, and Brazil is also critical for food security, because it's not only soy that Brazil is the largest producer and exporter, but also it's among the top 5 for cocoa, coffee, cotton, maize, cattle, pork, poultry. I mean, Brazil is a feeder of the world. So for all these criticalities and all these key aspects, Brazil is a very important country to be analyzed in this stickiness assessment. So to measure the stickiness, as I said, the persistence level of Brazil's soy supply chain, I applied this in the municipalities, looking at the municipalities supplying relationships with export traders. So the reddish municipalities here are those that were more persistent in their trading relationships. What does this mean? This means that between 2003 and 2017, these reddish municipalities, in average, they supplied to more or less the same traders, Whereas the yellow municipalities, they traded with shifting with different traders over this period. So this is just an observation. This is just looking at this pattern. This is a fact. It's mathematical. It's just measured whether we had a persistent supply network or a volatile supply network. So to identify, then the next step was to identify and explore the stickiness predictors and underpinning factors. So we asked ourselves, okay, once we know these patterns, what are the predictors, what are the underpinning factors that condition the existence of this stickiness? So for this, we designed a qualitative and quantitative analysis to look at these patterns and understand what's behind these patterns. So I conducted field work where I interviewed 83 actors of the soy supply chain. I also conducted 21 consultations with key experts of the field. I visited 31 places in the map. So many of the most important soy producing regions in Brazil, as you can see in the south, in the Midwest, in the north of Brazil. And then we also ran this quantitative method called historical random forest model to assess the influence of each of these factors on predicting stickiness. So just a parenthesis here to show some photographs of fieldwork. Of course, it was a very hard work, but at the same time, it was a delight. So as you can see here, there is this is a productive landscape, productive mosaic in Mato Grosso. This is a preserved river basin in the north of Mato Grosso. Some fallow areas here waiting for the rainy season to come so that soy could be planted. Some of the meetings and the events that I participated here, including a football match by indigenous women on a Sunday. So it was a very nice fieldwork, I can assure you. Some delightful photographs I took. This is in Maranhão. This is in Rio Grande do Sul, in the south of Brazil, wheat plantation here. This is the Araguaia River, one of the rivers I most love in my life. And this is my field assistant who accompanied me to the north of Paraná. He was visiting a silo as well. And then the third set of methods was designed to explore the implications of stickiness for environmental governance, particularly looking at these interactions with zero deforestation commitments made by companies, made by private actors trying to address deforestation in their supply chains. So for this, we used two econometric models. The first one to estimate the probability of a company to adopt a ZDC dependent on their level of stickiness. And the second model was to estimate how stickiness could moderate the effectiveness of soy ZDCs in reducing deforestation in Brazil. So just to give you an overview, a general overview of the variables used in these econometric models. So we looked at the adoption of zero deforestation commitments, for example, as a binary variable, soy deforestation risk as calculated by trace, supply chain stickiness as calculated by our previous chapters, territorial deforestation risk from trace as well, and then some control variables like the export share, like what's the company's relative share of market dominance relative to total exports to see how powerful this company was in the market composition. Then exports to Asian markets, exports to European markets to see whether, for example, companies that export more to Europe than to Asia would be more likely to adopt more zero deforestation commitments than those who export more to Asia. So all these control variables were accounted. And also these total unprotected areas suitable for soy sourcing in the region. The fourth set of methods was designed to explore the implications of stickiness for local rural development. And for this, we designed these comparative case studies of 4 soy municipalities where we picked one high and one low stickiness municipality in frontiers, meaning places where there is still space for agricultural expansion. I know the concept of frontiers is much more complex than this, but for our purpose here, only this capacity of expansion matters. And then one high and one low stickiness in consolidated regions. These are the four picked municipalities. And then just to give you a glimpse on the land use and land cover changes that took place in these municipalities over this period between 1985 and 2019. So for example, this is Balsas, as you can see, mostly covered by native vegetation in 85, and then lots of soy arriving, but still a lot of native vegetation to go. The same here in Bom Jesus, a low stickiness municipality in a frontier. But then you can observe here a very different pattern in Passo Fundo, which is a consolidated municipality, agriculturally consolidated municipality in Rio Grande do Sul, where you can observe, for example, lots of mixed farming, probably wheat and pasture lands becoming soy. And similar pattern in Sorriso, which is already consolidated municipality in Mato Grosso. You can see all over soy. The reddish color is soy. So findings, the overall findings of the thesis. So the first finding here is that the longer the time window, the less sticky trade relationships are. So this is very interesting because it relates a lot to our personal acquaintances and our personal relationships. This graph is basically showing that for all the 6 types of relationships we analyzed here, the longer the time period we analyzed, the less sticky these relationships were. What does this mean? See, for example, yourself. Consider your friends now and the friends you had last year. Probably they are more or less the same. This is what these points here show. So now think of the friends you had 14 years ago and think of how many of these friends you had back there are still the same today. So this point here shows that many of your friends have changed in this 14 years period. So this is the stickiness assessment of the soy supply chain in Brazil. It's very likely that the longer we analyze, the more volatile the supply chain is, the less sticky the supply chain is. So another set of findings here, we basically found that economic incentives, institutional enablers and constraints, social and power dimensions, biophysical and technological aspects, they predict and determine stickiness at the local level. So these are some of the variables that we assessed in the historical random forest model. I'm not going into details in any of them, but just one. So for example, the more soy processing infrastructure we find in one municipality, and the more surplus capacity this municipality has in processing infrastructure, the more stickiness we tend to find. And this is shown in the model. So another variable here, for example, volatility in market demand. So the more the intra-annual prices of soy vary, the less stickiness we find in this municipality. And this is shown in the model. And other variables that also matter for stickiness: land tenure security, renting, environmental and land use regulation, power and productive arrangements manifested through the existence of cooperatives or large farms, for example. Of course, stability of production and supply, use of technology, etc. So from after we identified these factors, these static factors predicting stickiness at the local level, we also found some dynamic processes that interact with these factors. And they are more dynamically manifesting through stickiness, which means they influence stickiness, but they are also influenced by stickiness. And somehow stickiness can be a proxy for these dynamic processes. So they are trust and social embeddedness, locking effects, supply chain power and agency. The following set of findings here relates to the econometric models. And then basically we found with these econometric models that stickiness increases the likelihood of traders to adopt a zero deforestation commitment, but it also increases their deforestation risk. So when we analyzed these soy traders sourcing from municipalities and those traders that adopted the Amazon soy moratorium or unilateral commitments, they had higher soy deforestation risks, actually. And the potential explanation for this is hypothetical, we couldn't prove this yet, but it is that sticky traders, they are also more credible, more trustworthy, and because of this, when they settle into frontier regions, they issue encouraging signals for local deforesting actors to clear land, to invest in deforestation. As you know, deforesting is a very expensive investment. It's not cheap, it's not trivial. So they need to receive a very strong encouraging signal from these traders that they will be settled, they will be stable in one location in order to deforest, because then farmers want to believe that in the next 5 or 10 years, they will have someone trustworthy to trade with. In contrast, the volatile traders, the shifting traders that engage less with the locations, when they start sourcing from one place, they will probably buy only the margins or the leftovers of the credible sticky traders. Why? Because these farmers, when they see these volatile traders coming to their regions, they will think twice or 3 times or 4 times before investing in deforestation and investing in start production, because they are not sure if these traders will be there the next year. Then the next set of findings refer to these agricultural cooperatives. With these 4 comparative case studies across the soil municipalities in Brazil, we found that agricultural cooperatives are mediating institutions of stickiness. This means that they alter the levels of stickiness, and they potentially lead to inclusive or maldevelopment. So basically, you have these dynamic processes, lock-ins, trust and social embeddedness, power and agency. These manifest through the levels of stickiness that are quantitatively measured. And then rural cooperatives, they come in here to interfere in these levels of stickiness because they interfere in the levels of lock-ins. So basically, cooperatives are designed, are created, as we found, to change, to break through lock-ins, to increase trust and social embeddedness, for example, by providing fuel, clothing, or groceries to farmers. They also change the power and agency dynamics because they break through the power asymmetry, the information asymmetry, because traders, their business models rely a lot on information. And when they control information, they control production and farmers. But then the cooperatives, when they come in, they break through this information asymmetry because they have capillarity. They are widespread in the territories. They have direct connections with the farmers, and therefore they also have a lot of information on production. Therefore, they can change these power, information, and agency differences. And these interactions between these 3 dynamic processes manifested through stickiness and the cooperatives, they will lead to either inclusive development or maldevelopment, meaning very essentially here excluding development. So the results and conclusions. Now I will try to respond directly to the questions that I raised in the beginning. So how can we analyze supply chain relationship patterns? Basically, as I said, with the stickiness concept and method. What is the relevance of these supply chain relationship patterns for sustainability governance? As we found, stickiness levels influences the adoption of zero deforestation commitments and soy traders' deforestation risk. How sticky can these supply chain relationship patterns be? As we designed this concept and method, supply chain relationship patterns can vary a lot between 0, totally volatile, and 1, totally stable. And then what are the underpinning factors or predictors of this supply chain stickiness or non-stickiness? Several factors perceived by actors, and also some of these factors tested by our historical random forest model and theoretically grouped as economic incentives, institutional enablers and constraints, social and power dynamics, biophysical and technological aspects. All these factors influence stickiness. And then we can break down, we can break these factors down into all the factors demonstrated in the table. And then what are the interactions between these supply chain relationship patterns and environmental governance? As I showed, stickiness tends to increase the trader's likelihood of adopting a ZDC because they are more credible, they are more trustworthy, and also they probably bear higher reputational risks, but probably also they also face high risks of stability of supply. They don't want to have their supplies disturbed or disrupted by any shocks. Therefore, they are more likely to adopt ZDCs also. But they also have more soil deforestation risk. So at the same time, they are more likely to adopt the ZDCs. The ZDCs are more likely to be ineffective. This is potentially contradicting, but it's very interesting to explore further. So I call all my colleagues here to design novel methods, novel econometric models, field work, qualitative research to investigate further why does this happen. I have already proposed one hypothesis related to the signals issued by trustworthy traders, but I think this is very relevant for further exploration. Then what are the implications of these supply chain relationship patterns for local development? As we found, cooperatives and stickiness combined have relevant implications for landscapes, determining whether we will have inclusive or excluding development, for example. And then the final question, the primary question, how can we understand and interpret global commodity supply chains to change them into drivers of positive social and environmental transformations? So what I found here is that we need to study these relationships embedded in global commodity supply chains, meaning the relationships between actors with each other, but also the relationships between actors and productive regions and landscapes, because this includes systematically observing and measuring these patterns for increasing the level of transparency we have on supply chains. We need to increase transparency of our supply and value chains, particularly on our food and natural resources chains, because this is determining for sustainability, because we need to know what we are consuming and what are the impacts we are causing through our consumption. And by knowing this, we can transform our consumption patterns, our consumption habits, and also the demands we make to our governments and to our companies as suppliers. So now that we know that supply chain relationship patterns, whether more or less sticky, matter for sustainability, this is another piece of knowledge increasing the supply chain transparency. And just as final remarks on policy implications, with this knowledge of stickiness, we can predict the restructuring of trade flows in face of shocks, because once we know how sticky or how non-sticky traders are with their territories, with their sourcing territories, we know, for example, if one territory has a drought and then the production fails in there, how likely is this company to break as well, because it is very sticky to this region, or how likely is this company to simply shift the sourcing linkages to other regions? Also, this knowledge can inform territorial planning, land use zoning, agricultural policies. For example, once we know the level of stickiness across regions, we can direct public policies for agricultural subsidized credit, for example. Is it interesting for us to subsidize credit in one municipality that is very sticky to traders and that still has a lot of native vegetation to go, or not? Maybe it is, because by this we can also condition this subsidized credit to not expanding, and we can rely on sticky traders to implement these conditions. Also, we decrease supply chain opacity, meaning that we increase the opportunities for civil society, consumers, downstream actors to influence their upstream businesses towards more sustainability. And for ZDCs, we can inform stakeholders about companies that are non-sticky, and therefore we can more easily commit and deliver without additional benefit to conservation. Meaning, for some companies, it's very easy to sign a ZDC and not deliver anything, because if they are non-sticky, they can simply shift their suppliers. They can simply shift to other regions without the risk of deforestation. For sticky companies, it's different. Once they sign ZDCs, they are very strongly committed to implementing this, and also committed to these territories. They cannot simply change. Therefore, they are more likely to deliver effective results in these DDCs. And then, yes, that was the final slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I stop here.
Parfait. Félicitations. Thank you for your presentation, Tiago. Your presentation which highlighted your work and the importance of your results. It's time to listen to the comments and the questions of the jury. Professor Gert Sparovek, do you have any questions to ask? Do you have any comments about the thesis?
Thank you, Marie. And since I first saw the first results of Tiago's work, I got very enthusiastic about it and had a really very good feeling and expectations about what would come out. And I'm really happy that even my high expectations were exceeded by what was delivered by Tiago. So really, I want to congratulate you and all everybody that was working with you together with this research work. I have one or two questions here that I would ask is, you made a lot of interviews. I think it was 83 interviews with different actors, and some of the findings of these interviews you have brought into your discussion, and some of them you have brought into your quantitative modeling, but not all of them. So the question is, how could you try to explore a little bit more analytical these interviews? Because I think a lot of comments you got about what could influence or not stickiness or the trade relations, you could not really find a quantitative variable to bring into your method. So what other methods you could try to use to better explore all these interviews and these qualitative findings you have made during these interviews?
So
I don't know if you
respond
answer
now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Gerd. Thanks for your presence, for your last minute joining of this thesis committee. I really appreciate your presence here. Also, the comments you provided on the thesis were really, really impressive and made me progress very much. So, responding to your question, I conducted these 83 semi-structured interviews. Then I coded all these interviews into the topics raised by all these actors. And then, there is a long way of coding and merging and intertwining these topics and combining and analyzing all the factors raised by the actors. So basically, I asked them, what are the stickiness factors? Of course, not like this. Of course, I had very detailed breakdown questions that led me to this overarching question, but this was the objective. And then once I coded all these interviews, I also tried to find quantitative variables that I could input into the historical random forest model. So of course, I could not find proxies to all the subjects and topics and factors raised by the actors. And then some of them are only qualitative accounts, qualitative narratives that I explain in the thesis and also in the submitted paper. But then for some of these variables, I could find quantitative proxies and then measure the influence. And these results are reported in the thesis and in the paper as well. So So just to say this, how could I explore these interviews more analytically? The direct answers would be like coding and grouping in terms of topics. I don't know if I fully respond to your question or.
It was a good answer. Thank you. And just one more question is, you stopped in some point because you had to defend the thesis and the time was over and things like that. But if you would have more time and more resources, and what would be the next step of this research, in your opinion? What would you do next?
I think I would have many possibilities. So one of them would be the natural possibilities would be exploring the dimensions of resistance to shocks, recovery ability of supply chain networks. I'd like to explore these things. But on a more personal level, I think I would like to explore further the narratives, because on this field work, I was very interested in understanding the conditions, the factors, the underpinning topics that determine this existence, the existence of this phenomenon called stickiness in supply chains. However, I learned many stories, many narratives that also explain why supply chain actors engage and disengage, why supply chain actors go to some locations and leave some locations, why some actors invest in heavy facilities and why some actors invest in light facilities. And all these topics are very interesting and relevant for me. So I kind of put them aside. I deepened my knowledge on them as far as possible, but of course then I needed to come back to my original thesis objectives. But if I had more time, if I had more research capacity and energy, I would definitely pursue more of these narratives explaining explaining why these actors engage or disengage with territories and with each other, and the factors that go beyond economic factors. Because in land use sciences and in economic geography, we are very used to identifying economic factors, economic drivers, infrastructural conditions, governance and regulatory mechanisms that determine these interactions. But then I found a very rich variety of stories and narratives, for example, related to information, to trust, to social embeddedness, to social relationships that are neglected in these economic studies, I would say. Yeah.
And would this research be with the same methods you have used, or would you have to choose another kind of methodology for this research, for this next step research?
Well, perhaps I would do a more ethnographic, a deeper level ethnographic research. I would draw more on these anthropological methods and things like this, because at this time I was just on the superficial level of many methods. So perhaps I would need some deeper single method. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think this is the questions I would like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sparovek. Dr. Toby-Gardner, do you have any question or any comment about the thesis?
Yeah, thanks, Marie-Laurence, and thanks and bravo, Tiago, for a wonderful presentation. I'd also like to commend you on something in particular, which is the bravery you've shown in your thesis. A thesis is always intended to be an original work that allows you to develop, not just do science or do science that's of interest to your colleagues or your supervisor, but be pushed out of your comfort zone and develop new skills. And I think you're one of the examples of people that come most to mind, of people that push themselves purposefully out of their comfort zone. into a lot of the analysis you did, and to go for a thesis that blends really quite different approaches with the field work that you have a long history in, but also with the analytical techniques and such difficult conceptual questions. It's really, really admirable. There's many topics we could discuss, and of course we've discussed some already, but the one I would like to pick up on is these internal, and I know that there's no easy answer here, but good to just hear a bit more of your thoughts. But these internal contradictions, apparent contradictions that exist around, well, what do we do with this information? The fact that the stickier players are more likely to have a zero deforestation commitment, the fact that the stickier players are also more likely to be associated with more deforestation exposure, the fact that by definition, by virtue of their stickiness, they have in principle more agency to affect change, yet also by virtue of their dominance, they can crowd out the role that the cooperatives might be able to play, who you cite as being such a key agent in trying to push against the risks of maldevelopment. If you bring all of those things together, and then ask the question, do we want to be encouraging stickiness in a particular region? Do we want, of course, the old adage, as you're very familiar in the kind of policy space on supply chains, is we want good actors to stay in bad places. We don't want the good actors to flee from frontiers and the vacuum to be occupied by unscrupulous actors who will never change. So how do we do that? We want these good actors to remain more sticky in the bad places, but by so doing, of course, there becomes another contradiction, a potential rebound, where they'll invest more infrastructure, and necessarily there will be some rebound dynamic, some agglomerative effect, where more players will come in because they would have paved the way and lowered the entry costs for other actors. So boil all of those tensions and contradictions down to the simple question of whether we should encourage stickiness or not from a policy perspective. Or perhaps you could see it through a different lens. You've engaged with a lot of policymakers in Brazil. Put aside the difficulties of the current administration. If you were with one senior policymaker, what would be the one thing with regards to that? Maybe some of my questioning might be what they would come with. What would be the one thing that you'd want them to take away? And what might be the one thing you would want them to not take away? A worry of misinterpretation maybe that could be taken from your work. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much, Toby. I appreciate your presence here, and I think you just asked the most fundamental question that I've been trying to address all over this thesis and this time, and I will probably keep thinking of it in the next steps. And also, I'd like to acknowledge and to everyone here that I will be joining Tracy's team shortly, and I'll be directly working with Toby, so we'll have the opportunity to respond to these questions in action directly. Let's see if we can do that. So my thought on this is, in symbolically speaking, is like the question of the chicken and the egg. Who comes first, right? In terms of a metaphor. Because if you have, as I said, if we have sticky traders who invest in locations, it is positive in a certain way because they are more accountable, they are more responsible, they can more easily be attributed to what happens in the locations they source from. But at the same time, if there is space for expansion, they will also incentivize expansion, right? So on the other hand, if we have less sticky companies, we have less accountable, less transparent, less traceable companies because they are more shifting and more difficult to grasp and to understand their patterns. They also issue different signals to the locations. So in the end, there is always this to me, the answer to this question lies in the differentiation between the farmer and the land, I would say the land actor, which is not necessarily a farmer. The land actor could be the land grabber, the land speculator, the land occupier, or those actors who benefit from market signals and the land availability. So for example, if there is one municipality where there is a lot of lands to be expanded, to be cleared, especially legally, and there is one big trader thinking of building a silo in this municipality, this land actor will try to anticipate, go to this location, buy these lands with native vegetation, clear and prepare for farmers who will come later. So it's really a matter of land speculation for accruing, for reaping the benefits of these changing land prices over time. And the farmers themselves, once they are already settled in one farm, in this situation, so for this land actor, I don't think stickiness can do anything. That's the point here. Because this is about state, it's about regulation, it's about land tenure, it's about stock of land. The more lands we have available, the more the actors will go there and try to use these lands, right? Efficiently or inefficiently, regardless. But on the other side, for the profile of farmers, and for those farmers who are really interested in investing in the soil profile, investing in increasing the productivity of their farms, in increasing their production, in intensifying production, and then getting more value for the same piece of land, if these farmers still have areas that can be legally cleared, then stickiness matters for these farmers. Because if these farmers have sticky relationships with their traders, and their traders come to them and say, look, you still have areas to expand, but I'd rather pay you a bonus or invest on your farm or subsidize your production, whatever, in order to help you to increase your productivity on the areas you are already using, and you commit yourself to not expand onto these areas that can be legally cleared, then stickiness has a role. So we have to differentiate these two actors, because the farmers, if we have farmers with a legal, if farmers are already settled and they have the legal right to deforest in this farm, they will do it unless there is market pressure on them and unless there is sticky traders putting market pressure on them. On the other hand, when this farmer leaves this land and goes somewhere else, and there are non-sticky traders in these areas, and these areas are open for exploration, they become land actors, and then they will buy these lands and clear and try to make profits from them. So I think it's really a matter of differentiating these two profiles.
Thank you, Tiago. That was a very thoughtful and useful answer, and I look forward to exploring it in practice with you, as you say. There's a matrix of factors there, and boiling it down, it seems that it's, we do want good actors, good sticky actors, combined with the right incentives and the right good governance on the ground. But maybe just one follow-up then, in interest of time, because it's such a conceptually challenging topic and there's so many dimensions, and you were in that elevator with a minister, what is the one thing you would like them to take away most from your work? And what is the one thing that you would be most concerned that people might misinterpret?
Well, the thing I would like to raise further in the agenda would be this idea that we need to understand relationship patterns to design sustainability initiatives, including public policies. So we need to take this into account. So this is the very key message here. I mean, it's not necessarily good or bad, or it will not determine fundamentally the effectiveness or ineffectiveness, but it will increase the likelihood of effectiveness if we take this information into account. So we need to think of this when designing and devising these initiatives. And the risk of misinterpretation is that I'd like to try to mitigate here is this idea that stickiness is a cause of something. As far as I understand, stickiness is another factor, another dimension, another dynamic process influencing all these things. So we should be careful of attributing that I know I did this and I did this with all the caution that I could, but for the sake of clarity, sometimes I needed to say that this leads to this, but I still want to be very careful on causation. You know, it's very difficult to grasp causation in these social sciences and social aspect dynamics here. And although we use econometric models and try and things and methods that try to capture quantitative signals from all these interactions, causation is very difficult. So I'd like to remain on the exploratory level. So all these things are exploratory. We are just observing patterns, identifying relationships, hinting at certain things, but we are not completely sure that one thing causes the other yet.
Thank you, Tiago. That was a long elevator ride, but summarized well. I will pass the mic back to the chair, Marie-Laurence.
Thank you, Topi. Then Sophie, Professor Sophie van Beek. Sophie, do you have any comment or questions about the thesis?
Thank you, Marie-Laurence. So, well, first, thank you, Tiago, for your presentation. I was really happy to take part in your thesis jury and to read your work, which I found very interesting. Many positive comments have already been made, and I will certainly join them. I was also really struck by how obviously you are deeply and personally committed to this topic and to this work, which I thought was really nice to see also. I have one question. Is sort of similar to the question that Toby asked you, but slightly different. So Celia, I think, is in the audience. Maybe she is. But anyway, I will ask the question anyway. She will imminently start a position working in a big consultancy firm on sustainable food production. So what's the take-home message for her that you think she should really take with her in her new job?
Well, that's this very clear message. Don't take economic factors or the rational actor theory for granted to explain everything in supply chains. I mean, there are more stories and qualitative factors that cannot be grasped by econometric models in between the land and the heaven when talking about supply chains. Pay attention to this. That's the takeaway message.
Wow, this is really striking. So for this particular point, you managed to summarize it in a very concise nutshell. No, it's not, which is not a negative comment on any of the other answers, but it's probably a great skill to have to put it in a nutshell like that. Well, you replied very quickly, so I guess I will ask a second question then. So it's maybe, yeah, I don't know, slightly less focused on your own topic, but you did quite an extensive review of the literature, and now you have your own findings about the supply chain of soy in Brazil. Is there anything that you would want to pinpoint as being very specific to the soy supply chain to Brazil that you did not find mentioned anywhere else?
Yes, yeah. So one, of course, I glanced through other commodity supply chains, and this stickiness concept and method is a story that can and should be applied to other commodity supply chains. of course, with adaptations and differences here and there. But I think the soy supply chain was a kind of perfect fit for this initial exploration because, for example, if I had applied this method on the sugarcane supply chain, I would find that there is stickiness everywhere because the sugarcane supply chain is mostly vertical. So the companies control everything in the supply chain. So it's kind of irrelevant. So another point that I could also learn from this particular experience is that the soy supply chain is more heterogeneous. It is more horizontal, despite you still have some key companies, the A, B, C, D, controlling the largest market share, but yet there is a great diversity of actors in the local places. And even though these A, B, C, D companies apparently control a lot, you have a lot of these local brokers, local warehouses, cooperatives breaking through this structure. This is quite interesting to observe and to learn firsthand from the field. So I think it's always relevant to apply this assessment, this stickiness assessment on horizontal supply chains, but I would be very interested in reading and learning about other supply chains as well.
Okay, thank you. I will stop there, but not before congratulating you again on your work.
Thank you, Sophie. Professor Eric Lambert, do you have any question or comments?
Yes, thank you, Tiago. So I guess we're all asking some variation of the same question, and unsurprisingly, they all have to do with stickiness. You know, I wonder why. But just to think more in terms of theoretical consideration, you know, there are many theories that deal with decision making by land use managers or land use actors, and somehow you've developed your concept of stickiness almost as a standalone concept. Now, if you want to reintegrate this concept of stickiness into existing theories of land use decision making, what was the role of that concept with respect to incentives or whatever? And then both for traders and producers, because I assume, you know, these are two different questions.
Yeah, so yeah, I went through the literature that looks at how these actors make land use decisions, and indeed they touch upon these issues of relationships, but mostly on an economic basis or on a political economy basis, which is related to, as I spoke briefly in the beginning, in terms of trust and the social relationships embedded in there. So the way to integrate this knowledge into the land system sciences, for example, or economic geography, is another component to explain why actors cluster in some regions, for example, or what are the underlying and underpinning factors for frontiers to expand, for example. And stickiness could be one. As I said, so now we have this concept and method to measure stickiness. And for example, when we see land renting in economic geography field, for example, we know that the value of land is related to the expansion, or when you have the expectation of land valuation, actors will come into the market and will start using this land. But then what's the role of the relationships in there? What's the role of this combination of factors that manifest through more persistent or less persistent relationships? So this would be the take in from this work to theories like land system, to theoretical fields like land system sciences, economic geography, or even the political economy field, which talks about the social embeddedness, which is another way to look at stickiness indeed. The concept of social embeddedness is very similar to stickiness. However, the social embeddedness in trade relationships as a concept did not have a method to measure, did not have a consideration of what were the other processes that were manifested through this. So I think there is a very positive and constructive dialogue between these things. I mean, I drank a lot from these fields, I internalized them, but then I'm trying to offer back to these fields this, okay, now we can measure this. There is a way to look at this relational data, for example, Trace. Trace gathered all this trade and customs data and made sense of this. It demonstrated all the linkages of the supply chain from production to consumption. That's very nice, but still we need to see, okay, what can this mean? And analyzing the persistence of these linkages is another contribution, another step in this process.
Okay. To be much more specific on my question, so how does stickiness influence the incentives for traders and for producers to act in a certain way?
Stickiness influences traders in the sense of reliability over time. It's a metric that indicates reliability, trustworthiness, and this is a key component of investment decisions. So if I am a farmer, I have relationships with a sticky trader. I know this sticky trader is coming to my region. I can more securely take the decision of clearing more land and investing on expanding production because I know there will be someone credible, trustworthy to buy my production in the next 5 or 10 years. On the other hand, if I have a non-sticky company coming in, I will keep trading on spot markets with this company. I will be reluctant to open new lands because it is expensive. And I may think, if I open more land, produce more soy, I might not have reliable traders to sell my production to, and I might not get good prices, so I become more reluctant.
Okay. A more applied question, as you probably know, in exactly 1 month now, the European Commission will release its proposal for new directives on sustainable corporate action, and that involves some prescription on due diligence. So if, how does stickiness interact with due diligence, if at all?
Yeah, the interaction with due diligence is precisely that sticky companies will probably be more likely to demonstrate their supply chains to these due diligence mechanisms. Because once they are sticky, it means they are more engaged with these locations and with these farmers. And so they will be in a better position. Probably they already have even, but they will be in a better position to demand, to request from their suppliers the information needed to demonstrate that they are complying with the due diligence systems. Whereas I see, as far as I can see, the non-sticky companies, they will have a harder time to demonstrate this because mostly they source indirectly, they source from cooperatives or local warehouses, for example, and they don't have the information on their supply chains.
So do you predict reliably that once this directive is implemented, there will be a step increase in stickiness in your data?
Yes, I could hypothesize that. I wouldn't say for sure, but that's a likely outcome, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then the supervisor, Professor Patrick Meffroy, do you have more comments? Other comments?
Yes,
other
well,
questions?
of course, I turn my voice to the praise, but I was willing to ask a question maybe partly on behalf of Tobias Kümmele, who was unable to be here, but I think it's a question that he could have asked more or less. Probably on this relation between qualitative and quantitative approaches, and that's something that that you struggled and you achieved also a lot during the thesis. That you had lot of exchanges with Tobias on that, but also with me. We had a lot of discussion. I returned to some of the emails where you were complaining about Western civilization, its appetite for mathematics, etc. And that at some point you would never trust a quantitative analysis against your qualitative insights from the field. So my question is first, okay, now at the end of that road, where do you stand on this? Do you still think that you would never trust any quantitative results more than your qualitative insights from talking to the people? And the second question, it's a bit a sub-question of that, but would you see that in your thesis there are really insights and conclusions that come from the quantitative analysis and that you would have been really unable to achieve with only qualitative approaches?
Wow. Thank you for asking this question. I love it. It's more like a meta science reasoning, right? A kind of thinking epistemologically, and I really like this. So direct answer, I think I would not achieve all these findings and results without the combination of both. Of course, there were times that I was completely upset and bored with the quantitative methods and all those numbers, and running, looking at an R screen with all these codes, and oh, Jesus Christ, I was horrified by it. But in the end of the day, now I fully not fully, but I quite understand this, the value of regressions, the value of looking at trends that we can observe in numbers through these methods. And for example, the value of the historical random forest model, thanks to Vivian, who is also here. She taught me everything about random forest, and she helped me to devise this model. And then I understood that the random forest model is a way to run million regressions at the same time, and it's incredible. So of course we have to benefit from all those advancements, but still, I think that if we only have quantitative, okay, this is a very personal note. I don't want to judge anyone here, but my experience says to me that if we only rely on quantitative methods, we don't see what's internal to people. And I think science has a role to elicit things that are related to people. So we have a role here. We want to construct knowledge. We want to increase our awareness about the world, about these processes. And of course, we do need quantitative methods to see all these big things. But then we also need qualitative methods to go inside people, to ask these people what's behind their actions, what's behind these patterns, what are their feelings. And at this moment that I was struggling really hard to integrate, because I was so biased, I was so, how can I say, so partial towards the qualitative insights that I got from the field, and they didn't make sense in face of the quantitative results I had. I was struggling with this integration, and I want now to thank, of course, you helped me quite a lot. You were crucial to this, and I can't say anything, but a very simple insight that came from Rachel Garrett. I don't know if she's there, but she said once, one thing is data, another thing is perceptions. So this changed the entire story for me. It's obvious, of course, it's qualitative methods are about perceptions. And, I was trying to treat them as facts, as real data, as real observations. And that's why I could not integrate them. And, it seems absurd now to think of these, and how come you didn't think of this super obvious understanding? But when she said, look, you have to think of data and perceptions, and then everything made sense, and then it was easier to reconcile these things. Okay, now I'm talking about perceptions, how people feel things, how people feel about these phenomena, etc., etc.
Okay, so seems that you have achieved a lot. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I don't have more to say at this stage.
Thank you, Patrick. Does anyone online have any question about the thesis? No. No question?
I have a question.
Okay, Simon.
Hi, Tiago.
Good afternoon.
Congratulations once again for the great work. Good to see you. I have a question. I think you've touched upon this a little bit, but and Eric also mentioned it with the due diligence, and a little bit with the question where you talked about how we apply this concept of stickiness for other commodities. But if we think about the problem of trying to address deforestation caused by commodities such as soy and palm oil and so forth, do you see policymakers grasping the concept of stickiness? And if they do, how would they apply this to make better policies in terms of either you talked about effectiveness of the policy in order to integrate this, or in order to better implement these policies once they have them. So can you reflect a little bit on that?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Simon. Thank you for your question. And also thank you for being my colleague all over this time. We shared an office. We are very good friends. I'm very happy you are here. So just to answer your question quickly, I do think that policymakers are grasping the concept of stickiness indeed. However, not phrased as such. I mean, it's a kind of unaware acknowledgement of the concept of stickiness. But the entire due diligence thinking and the entire idea of mandating requirements on companies to check their supply chains and verify sustainability criteria, this is heavily based on stickiness because, for example, once you start asking companies to check lots of documents, lots of criteria related to production and land use and the carbon emissions, everything, you are increasing the complexity of the supply chain. And once you increase the complexity of the supply chain, you are also increasing the stickiness of the supply chain. Because, I mean, these actors, in order to comply to the due diligence regulations, somehow they will increase their stickiness. You know what I mean? I mean, in the sense, for example, take this rural environmental registry that we have in Brazil, the CAR, which is basically a land ID. You have a land ID informing whether the farmer is compliant with the local legislation or not, whether the farmer has excess native vegetation that he can deforest legally, or whether he has deficits of native vegetation that he needs to restore. So once companies start having this information, they will naturally become stickier to these players, you know, and the players who cannot demonstrate these aspects, they will be somehow crowded out. You know what I mean? So in the end of the day, I don't say that they will cease to exist, because you will always have the black markets, or you will always have the markets that don't have due diligence mechanisms. You will always have soy laundering, for example, or beef laundering, or whatever. These things will continue to exist. But for the companies, the actors that are committed to this due diligence and that need to comply with the regulation, they will have stickier supply chains after the implementation of due diligence, because of the requirements, because of the complexity of this system, and because of the transparency that we will achieve, increased transparency. Did I answer your question?
Thanks, Tiago. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's of course it's a deep reflection on some of these issues, and congratulations once again, and likewise, like, really thankful for sharing an office with you for the past couple of years.
Okay, anyone else? And yes, Virginia?
Yes. Hi, Tiago. Thanks a lot. I'm glad to see you as well. And I just had a question that just came to my mind is that have you explored the role of a power or a measure of the size or the power or the influence of the land actors on the stickiness? Is there any inverse or direct relationship between the two? So like more power for actors, land actors tend to be more sticky, or the other way around? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Hi, Virginia. Thank you as well, your colleagues in the LEC. Thank you for your question. Indeed, I have explored these aspects of land tenure, and there is one variable even in this random forests model, which is related to the size of farms. And we found that larger farmers are actually less sticky because this is also related to their capacity of having silos. So larger farmers inside silos, that they have their own silo, they tend to be less sticky because they can harvest, store the production, and then negotiate with multiple traders, and therefore they are more shifty. On the other hand, smaller farmers that tend to have less in-farm silos, they tend to be less sticky or more sticky because when they plant, they are mostly already committed to some trader. So they rely more on future contracts and things like this because, as you know, soy, but this is a particularity of soy supply chain and maize and this kind of supply chain, grains supply chain, because these products are very perishable, which means they have to harvest and deliver somewhere. If they don't have their own silo, when they are harvesting, they are already committed with some trader or at least with a local warehouse where they will harvest and deliver directly. So it all depends, in this case, very particularly it depends on the size of the farm, because larger farmers, they have more economies of scale, and because of that, they tend to have their own silos. So it's a factor. It's a fact that depends on the existence of silos or not, and the existence of local warehouses that can provide services to small farmers or not.
Thank you so much. Interesting. Thanks, Tiago.
Okay. Anyone else? Oui, Nicolas?
Hey, Tiago. First, let me tell you that I'm really so impressed by all the work. I've always been, and it's just amazing. I think among the people in Coupled and others, you've been really an example for combining all these methods and being able to do quantitative and qualitative analysis, and with your great skill of thinking and your broad view on the subject. I think you made terrific results, and that's really amazing. And it was really great to have you all those 3 years. And it's maybe a detail, but when you were talking about your interpretations of this relation between the zero deforestation commitments and the stickiness combined to the deforestation risk, I had the thought. First, I'd be interested in how this was informed by your interviews, and maybe you can cite some examples, maybe some people who told you why that led you to that interpretation. And I immediately, knowing nothing about the subject, I first thought the other way around. I was thinking of companies that for a reason or another had a lot of deforestation in their supply chain might be likely to make zero deforestation commitments because they're under high pressure of reducing their deforestation. And then because they are making those commitments, they might become more sticky because they are trying to change something about it. But that is me not having gone to the field. And I would like to hear what, how the people you interviewed helped you understand that that interpretation.
Well, thanks, Nico. It was great pleasure to share this, the meetings and all the gatherings we had together, and I learned a lot from you, from your papers, from your research, from the, from having time with you. And thanks for this question as well. I think the answer for this is like we have multiple ways. It's always tricky to deal with these interviews and personal relationships, and I learned a lot because my objective was to understand, as I said, these the potential causes and the potential implications of stickiness. But of course, you cannot just go to the field and ask these things to the actors so bluntly and so directly. At some point, of course, you arrive at this point and they will understand that this is your objective, but you have to contextualize the information. You have to transform these questions into things that are tangible for them, that are real in their lives. So, it's very subtle as well, because sometimes you need to grasp tones of voice or facial expressions, or insist and persist on some questions, like if you when you understand that the actor or the person doesn't want to talk about something, but at the same time you have to be careful of not being rude and invasive. I mean, all these considerations are important, and I can just tell you, I had people, fingering on me and blaming me for the bad reputation of the soy supply chain in Europe and things like this. And I said, oh, I'm just a researcher. And of course, sometimes I wanted to engage on political conversations, but I refrained myself from that because that was not the purpose. And in some occasions, even people came to me, but you don't have an opinion. You don't say anything about these issues and facts. I said, that's not my purpose here. I don't have any opinion. I just want to hear you. And so after you have all this experience, you have to combine all these things. And as I said, I probably read 1,000,000 times the transcripts that I had. I heard 1,000,000 times all the audios and started grouping these topics. And I think, I don't have a formula for that. I just, can just say, let's do it. Let's learn by doing. Anyway. Did I answer your question?
Okay, thank you. I think we can end this defense at this point. Thank you, Tiago, for all the answers. Thank you to the members of the jury. Thank you, everyone here. And the jury will deliberate on this defense. The jury will log out and then log in again when the deliberation is closed. Okay.
Okay, so for those who remain here while the jury deliberates, we can chat or ask fun questions.
Congratulations, first and foremost.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Are you paying here for people who helped you during the dissertation and things like that? This is my main question.
Sorry, what did you say again?
Are you paying a beer? Are you going for a celebration, something like that? You should invite people who participated.
Yeah, I think, if I pay a beer to everyone who helps me here, I would be bankrupt next year because it's like so many people.
I think
but yeah, for sure.
Congrats! It was really, really beautiful to see.
Just buy shares of some company in Belgium, Tiago.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Just a second here. Yeah, but probably also, yeah, go on, Myron.
I've had one question over the last 3.5 years that I'm not sure I asked, and perhaps is more suitable for this than to the defense, which is, how on earth did you translate stickiness in Portuguese? Grude?
That's a very good question. I had multiple translations actually. I translated differently according to the context and according to the person as well. But I would say consistência.
Okay.
Consistência.
You made it sound fancy.
Yeah. Thanks.
Very
Couldn't
right.
be grude. A cadeia tá grudando ou tá desgrudando?
Is it good for you? Yeah.
And Tiago, I would ask, were you happy with? Because I know you made a really nice video to like explain the results back to the people you interviewed. So were you happy with like their reaction or how they responded to what you found and like that conversation? Because I know you tried really hard not to make it like a one-way extraction of knowledge, but a two-way sort of exchange.
Yeah, actually, I didn't receive any feedback so far. No one else replied to me formally. But I mean, because I set up an email, everything, expected people to send me things, but I had like informal feedback.
Yeah.
And I mean, no one else brought new information or new ideas or new insights after the video. But lots of people came to me to say, "Oh, that's very nice that you reminded of me and that you made this video and you sent it to me." I mean, it's a kind of I felt this kind of it's just gentle. It's just nice to give something back to people. People are so happy when because I went there, I went to their houses, to their offices, I spoke to them for 1 hour, 2 hours sometimes.
Yeah.
And 1.5 years later, this guy appears again with a video and a nice message saying, "Look, this is what I produced with the information you gave to me. Thank you very much for this. And if you have anything else to say, please drop me a line." And I think just this made people very happy. And I was happy to get this reverse feedback as well. People say, "Oh, this is very nice." And that's probably all of you have already heard this as field researchers. Field actors are always annoyed by the researchers who come there and talk to them and completely disappear. They don't give anything back. So I think it's a good practice we should all adopt.
Also because you can really like transform this into a negative relation, right? We went to do field research in Alta Floresta and they were they were refusing to receive us because of this type of things. So I think you are transforming things for the next generations doing the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, when Nico does his PhD.
Yeah.
But seriously, what are you doing to celebrate afterwards? I presume they'll come back with good news.
Yeah, let's. We are having dinner. We are going to pick up our dog, our daughter dog, because we have a daughter dog here as well. And the daughter dog is in the farm now. And yeah, once we go to my parents-in-law farm to pick up the dog, we'll have dinner and have a couple of beers there to celebrate. That's the plan. And we also got some good rains here. It's a huge drought in Brazil right now, especially in this region where we live, in the countryside of São Paulo. It's like we are having agricultural failures and water shortages and all these things. And 2 days ago there was 18 millimeters of rain, and today there was another 1 or 2 millimeters of rain this morning. So we have a lot to celebrate.
When's your first day of work at Trace?
1st of October.
Nice transition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so nice.
You're not gonna have much time to breathe, right? Did you have time to at least take some rest, like week at least?
Yes. Yeah, I took some rest last week.
You have 1 day tomorrow.
Yeah. I already spoke with André, by the way, André Vasconcelos, and yeah, we already have a plan. I'm just waiting for my new email to start sending emails all around and you know.
Oh, you're gonna be in Slack. It's gonna be so much worse than this. You have no idea.
Okay, I'm ready for that. Don't worry.
Yeah.
As Myron said, I've been polishing my how is it said? Armor.
The armor, yeah, for the fight. Absolutely. It must be shining already.
Yeah. I feel like a samurai with a shiny armor ready for the fight.
Yes. I can already visualize you, throwing up some grains of soy and then just chopping them before they hit the ground.
One needs to be a very good samurai to chop a grain of soy in the air, right?
That's a sure.
Just a second here.
Long time no see, Myron. You got a longer haircut these days.
Indeed, you mean like non-haircut, right?
I thought you had it longer in the back.
I do, with meaning that it's not being cut.
Very good point.
Come on, this is your Guma style.
There we are. I'm working on it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But good to see you too.
Yeah. I don't know when the last time I saw you was. Probably years now.
Yeah, I think since Bonn, since I was there.
More than likely. Corona makes everything, you think everything was last year, but it's all 2 years ago.
Yes, that's true. That's true. We've had this non-time period.
Going crazy in my living room.
Fancy, Tiago, just to say. That was my first impression. Like, whoa.
Yeah, Sam and I were saying that you look like the combination of the chair and the suit. It looks like your assistant has an assistant.
It matches with the chair.
Yeah, definitely.
That's totally by chance. That's
It's by fortune.
Yeah, for sure.
by fortune. Yeah. Wow.
You're making me wish it was later in the day. If I drink today now, I get all jittery.
Yeah, it's late for you, right? But for me, it's still.
My cutoff is 3.
Yeah, mine is 4. Yeah, I'd say after 4 I cannot drink tereré because then I won't sleep. But then the responsible for this suit and all this stuff is Simon, because I was seeing his photographs from his defense and he raised the standards, and then I said, look, I have to put the suit as well.
So on that topic, Tiago, we have a little card for you. I mean, I don't know, Erasmus, are you in the office? Okay, but maybe we can get it to you and show another day. But there's a little card from those of us at the institute, and there'll also be a little thing coming at some point. But I mean, I don't know whether you do they even send packages to your firm? Like, is it an address, or is it just Tiago in the wilderness, or where do I send you something?
I can send you address. I have an address. I have a home address. I'm not living in the farm, and I'm still there sometimes.
Yeah, but okay, there's there'll be a little thing coming from those of us at Illy.
Thank you very much. That's very nice. Very kind of you.
No problem.
But I'd like to receive your visits as well. You know, I'd be very glad to have you. I and Isabella, my partner, we've been talking about this, like preparing the house. Now we have guest room. You know, you should all come to visit us at some point, and I can take you to the farm, show you some of the Brazilian Cerrado wilderness.
Do you have space for kids as well?
Yes, of course. Yes. There is Nicolas' room here. You know, Nico has a bedroom here for kids. Yeah. And in the farm you have to camp, but at least there is a bathroom now in there, and there is like an open kitchen. So there is an open kitchen with a you know, a wood stove, like a traditional stove, and then there is a bathroom outside in some other parts. So it's good for camping.
Did you start your plants there already? Like planting the trees, the Cerrado trees that you were mentioning before?
Yes, I planted lots of trees, but they all failed. Only Baru survived. I went there 2 weeks ago, last week, and then thank you, Emily. Thanks very much. And then only the Baru trees survived. Can you believe it? The Cajá, Tamarindo, Caju, even the Caju. I think the Caju failed because the land was too good for it.
At least
Caju likes.
You have the most expensive one, which is Baru, but Cerrado is a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
So difficult.
But now I'm thinking I will hire someone to look after the new trees. I will start opening some small plots inside the forest because I have a forest there, a Cerrado forest. So I'm going to open some plots for the sun to come in and then put some new seedlings in these parts. And then I will hire someone to go there, look after them, and take these water bags and pump some water, you know, during the drought season, the dry season.
Yeah, try everything associated to bat can be a good idea for Cerrado, especially piqui.
Nice. Yeah, I have some piqui there, native piqui.
I love the fact that you're talking about piqui.
Yeah. Have you ever tasted piqui, Toby?
Claro.
Okay, Tiago is here. The sun is here too. Essayer de mettre ailleurs, hein? Il y a moins de soleil. Voilà. Ok, en ce 29 septembre 2021, le jury, réuni pour délibérer sur la thèse de M. Tiago Nogueira Pimenta dos Reis, titulaire d'un master en relations internationales de l'Université catholique pontificale de Rio de Janeiro et d'un master en environmental policy du Dublin University College, a validé les 180 crédits de sa formation doctorale, a entendu la présentation de ses résultats et de l'originalité de ses travaux lors de la défense privée, a participé lors de la défense publique aux échanges entre Tiago et les membres du jury, entre Tiago et toute personne ici présente, a validé l'ensemble du parcours doctoral. En vertu de quoi, le jury déclare M. Tiago Nogueira Pimenta dos Reis, docteur en sciences de l'UC Louvain. Congratulations, félicitations.
Bravo, Tiago.
And now unmuted, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So do I have time to say something, or Patrick says something?
As you prefer.
No, you can go first.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to take too much time, but I was just willing to congratulate you again and just to say a few words. Well, just to say that, okay, of course, anyone who knows you know that you're extremely passionate, that you're jumping 100% in everything you do. And I think this thesis, I think we have seen it today in this thesis, in your explanation, in your responses, but that at the same time you're also very open, so you have very strong convictions, but you showed also during this thesis that you're able to doubt, I mean, in the positive way, in the scientific way of not relying only on your convictions, but trying to put them to test. And I was really just willing to return to one of the points that Toby raised, but which I was really willing to use the same word that he used, that you have been very brave in jumping in this thesis, because it is really something that pushed you out of your comfort zone with a lot of coding, big data, statistical analysis, etc. Also, I think on the political or ideological side, that maybe this thesis, I mean, at least some of chapters of the thesis maybe had a more reformist mood than maybe the more radical or revolutionary mood that you would have on some of these issues in general. So I was just willing to say, I hope that you don't regret to have been brave and very brave, and that you're not only that you don't regret and that you're happy with that, but also that not only you jumped out of your comfort zone, but that also to some extent you expanded your comfort zone. And I think your response to my question illustrates that somehow. And I think it's okay. In some of your conversation earlier, you discussed about implementation science and how you would easily see yourself as being a bridge between scientific analysis and engagement and policy and advocacy. So I hope that well, with this thesis work and these few years past, you feel more comfortable with that. And yeah, enjoy.
Can I say something, or someone else?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, well, I cannot name everyone that I should thank here, because it's just so many people. And as I said, you know, in the invitation for this defense, I feel that all those people, all of you here particularly, but also many other people who are not here, are the real makers and constructors of this thesis. So I feel myself as just a tiny grain of sand, trying to, you know, connect all these points, all these ideas, all these people. So I feel as a facilitator of everything. I just facilitated and connected all these ideas. So I can only feel a huge gratitude, particularly for Patrick, for trusting me, believing me, you know, strengthening me and protecting me from deviations and from bad thoughts. I think, you know, this thesis would be impossible without the bravery of Patrick as well, and all the support. I think Patrick is, I mean, I don't have words to thank to Patrick, because he had precisely everything that I needed at the right times that I needed. He was the right person at the right times with the right ideas every time. You know, of course, many of you probably know this feeling of, what am I doing here? What's this? Why am I doing this? I should just quit and do something else. You know, sometimes I thought of going to the farm and planting trees, and, you know, I had all these crazy thoughts. And Patrick, you know, he treated me as a very patient man. So I really, really appreciate, Patrick, everything you did. I think you're just the most wonderful supervisor anyone can ever dream of. And everything that I achieved is because of you. Thank you very much. And a final remark is that I've been I also thank to the Trace team and the Trace colleagues, because I've been preparing myself. I feel as I have been preparing myself to do exactly what I'm going to do next. So it's just a very good combination, a very good fit, a very good, perfect next step. It's like I needed to go through this PhD experience to be able to do what I will do now at Trace, and what I want to do, and what I feel ready to do. So thank you very much, Trace people, Trace friends. You also contributed absolutely for this, and I'm super happy to be part of your team now. Thank you.
Well done, Tiago. Go and celebrate. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Congrats,
Bye,
Tiago.
everyone.
We'll be ready for you on Friday.
Yes.
Thank you.
Meeting at 7 a.m.
Congratulations, Tiago. Bye.
Felicidades,
Bye.
Tiago. Doctor.
Congrats, Tiago.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Congratulations from Berlin. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, enjoy.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Gerd.